Audio Unleashed.
So it's time to light this candle.
So are we going to turn this into a country music podcast now, or what?
No, that's from The Right Stuff.
No, I know. I was just joking on the fact about how much feedback we got for talking about Waylon Jennings last time, man.
I couldn't believe it. Yeah,
that brought people out of the woodwork. So yeah, man.
Yeah, I mean, we're both Southerners. I mean, this shouldn't be a big surprise.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Uh-huh. Anyway, let's make a podcast that's not about country music. How you feel about that?
All right, let's make a podcast that's about like speakers and stuff.
Cool.
That's a good idea. No one's ever done that before.
I know. We're going to make $1 million.
Yeah. So we're going to start with a discussion of speakers.
How about that?
Hot on the heels of, was it last episode we talked about Danny Ritchie and his review of or his technical breakdown of the Zoo Audio Dirty Weekend, whatever it was called?
It was recent. I don't know. It was very recent. Yeah.
Danny Ritchie, who's the head of GR Research, and which is a company that has a YouTube channel, but also offers mods for speakers. There's some criticism of him on Audio Science Review, which is probably the leading website you want to visit if you want to see criticism of people who write about audio or do any media about audio at all. And some people are, really tearing apart, the way he does speaker measurements and the way and his ethics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, let's address that, because there's always been this whole subgroup of audiophiles that they're kind of, I think, more into criticizing other people's statements about audio than they're actually into anything that would actually come out of a speaker.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way of putting it. Oh, yeah, we'll have fun with that.
And
Next, there's this really cool article co-authored by my favorite podcast co-host, Mr. Brent Butterworth, in the New York Times, called New Portable Cassette Players Transport You Back to the 80s. But do you really want to go there? I want to dig into this. I don't, for whatever reason here on Audio Unleashed, you and I don't talk a lot about our own journalism, but this one to me, we had to discuss this. I wanted to dig in. I wanted to ask you some questions because I do have them. So we'll save them. But basically, 30,000 foot view, you and your co-author, Ariana Vasquez, is it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Tested a handful of portable cassette players, which, people would think of like a Walkman revival kind of thing.
Yeah.
And reported the results. So I want to dig into that. I want to unpack it a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. Because there's a bunch of these things coming out. It's surprising.
Yeah.
I keep telling people about this. So like, are you serious? Yes, I'm serious. New models of these are coming out. And, I kind of just thought it was worth investigating because my attitude is if multiple manufacturers are getting into something, there's probably something there. I mean, I could be wrong. It could be another 3D video, but, but I figure there's probably something there. And literally this was, people say everything is a journey. I mean, eating lunch is your journey through whatever. But this is actually literally a journey, 2 journeys, one that Ariana took on the, New York subway commuting and to see what it was like to commute with these things. And then me journeying up to Innovative Audio up in Vancouver to run some tests. So
yeah, cool. Well, what else are we going to talk about, man?
We're going to talk about Bluetooth is dead.
Long live Bluetooth.
according to Cheap Audio Man, he is saying, there's a bunch of new Wi-Fi streamers from people like Weem and Erlich and several others. I will say we're in the process of testing these at Wirecutter right now. But these things are maybe $99, and you can plug them into your stereo or whatever, and you can stream from Wi-Fi instead of streaming through Bluetooth. And so ostensibly you get better sound quality, et cetera, et cetera. He goes into a pretty lengthy discussion of what these products are. And I kind of wanted to talk about some of this and also talk about, is Bluetooth really dead? For indoor use, I don't know, maybe, but let's talk about it.
Yeah. And next, for patrons, this is shockingly one of our most requested segments we've ever had. So
really?
this weekend, I came across a Reddit post from Cameron Oatley, who is now with headphones.com. He posted this video. DCS is threatening me with a 7-figure lawsuit over my review of the DCS Bartok, which is a digital to analog converter. And I threw it in the idea board, and I would say within, an hour, I got messages from 4 different people go, oh my God, did you see this? Like different links to the video. So apparently people really, really want us to talk about it. So therefore we're putting it behind a paywall. No, I'm kidding. We're making this a patron segment because it's pretty dorky, pretty nerdy. There's going to be a lot of jargon in here. So I think it's going to be more appealing to sort of, people who are going to patronize an audio podcast. But yeah, basically the long and short of it is DCS, this company that makes ridiculously expensive DACs, decided 2 years later that they were going to, threaten a lawsuit over this review. And sadly, this is becoming a more and more common trend. So we're going to dig into that a little bit and talk about it, talk about what it means. And
talk about we're going to examine the long and storied history of companies suing reviewers.
Yeah. I mean, just because it's becoming increasingly common doesn't mean it's new. Yeah.
It's not new.
So, yeah, you hopped in the Wayback Machine for a couple of really good examples. Yeah.
Dude, if it predates me, it's not new.
Yeah. Yeah, man, you predate color. So that's, the world was black and white when you were born. That was a long time ago. Let's get this party started. Let's talk about audio science review, man. So how'd you come across this conversation and why did it stand out to you?
One of our listeners sent it to us. Was it Carnell?
Man, I don't know. I'm getting old.
I think it was Carnell. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for sending it. So anyway, there's Audio Science Review, which is run by a guy named Amir. I can't remember his last name. I've never met him. It's super, super, super measurement based. And it's also, I'm not going to say Amir necessarily, but a lot of the people on there are extremely judgmental of other people who dare to express any kind of opinion or present any facts about audio. Mm-hmm. They haven't trashed us yet, to my knowledge, but I don't really get on there a whole lot. So they really kind of trash him a whole lot. And not all of, I shouldn't say, there's on these forums, there's always, as you know better than me, there's always some real sort of loudmouths on there that dominate it. Look, I mean, Danny's kind of begging for criticism because he touts, high-end AC cords, right? Which, good luck with that.
Yeah, and he calls anybody who does not believe in the value of a $9,000 power cord, he calls us either flat earthers or the left, which okay. Yeah.
Well, he's from Texas. He's from Texas, man. Look at it through that filter.
We're more worried about raising class consciousness than we are power cables, but okay. Anyway, so let's get to the heart of what they're really criticizing him about. This is the statement that caused all of the brouhaha, and I am reading from a post that somebody made quoting him on ASR. I didn't track down this video. So this is, according to them, this is the quote that caused all of this stink. It doesn't make any difference whether I own a Clipple or not to understand the value of owning that tool. Think of it as trying to measure the miles per gallon of a car. I have the means to measure it to 100th of a gallon. A Clipple has the means to measure it to 1,000th of a gallon. Does it really matter? No. What you're saying is like telling one of the world's greatest artists that they really need to be using the latest brushes, which, there's a little bit of grandiosity there.
Who said that?
Danny Ritchie. That's what they're criticizing him for. That's what started. Yeah, that's what
he
started
said
all
that.
of this. And basically, somebody coming in going, hey, I'm not a rocket scientist, but wouldn't that be counterintuitive? To not want more accuracy? But that's sort of where the dog pile started. Yeah.
First of all, as a measurement guy, there's always going to be someone who jumps in there. And quite often it's someone who's, kind of a lightweight and doesn't really understand measurements very well.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, oh, well, your measurements are invalid because you're not using the very latest whatever, right? Well, Danny uses a Clio, which I also have. And as a data acquisition device, it's great. Probably just as good as the Clipple. The accuracy is fine. It's just that the Clipple is automated. You don't actually have to know how to measure speakers to use a Clipple, right? You put the speaker in there and you hit a button and you walk away, basically. And it's all robotized, right? Whereas to use a Clio or to use any other, speaker measurement software that's existed since the Reagan era, you have to know how to measure speakers, okay? I mean...
Yeah.
Look, Vance Dickinson's a good friend of mine. He wrote the Loudspeaker Design Cookbook, which is now in its 8th edition. He's the editor of Voice Coil magazine. He and I have had many, many, many lengthy discussions about speaker measurement. He's the guy who really kind of taught me how. He still uses an LMS, which is the Reagan era thing I talked about. And I said, well, why do you still use it? And he's had everything else because people send them to him for free, okay? And because he's the editor of Voice Coil, he's one of the most influential people in the industry. He's like, I use LMS because I trust it and I understand 100% of how it works. And when I'm actually putting the speaker on a stand and running the measurements, I completely understand what's happening there. I am not turning the process over to someone else.
Although I have to say, Aaron of Aaron's Audio Corner, he uses a Clipple, and one of the greatest things about Aaron's channel to me is that he doesn't merely present the data, he explains the data. And I mean, Aaron's Audio Corner is just a masterclass in understanding how these objective measurements translate into subjective experiences. So it's not like we're not, I just want to clarify, because somebody's going to come in and accuse you of denigrating people who use Clipple or looking down. That's not what we're saying, right? Clipple's a great tool, but what we're saying is, not using Clipple doesn't mean you're doing it wrong or you're doing it poorly. So,
and that also invalidates all the speaker measurements that came before Clipple, and pretty much all of the speaker research we have that people like Amir rely on to tell him what makes a good speaker and a bad speaker were done in anechoic chambers, right? With relatively simple gear, and they didn't have CEA 2034 standard by then. It was all Harman guys using their own software, which I have used. It was called the Harman Audio Test System. I actually got a chance to use it. Alan Devantier came over who was I think he was the head of measurement at Harman. Now he's the head of audio research at Samsung or something like that. But he came over to my backyard and brought the whole thing. We ran some speaker measurements with it. And so I've used all this stuff. And for God's sake, Samsung, you go to their anechoic chambers in Suwon, South Korea, Clio, okay? Sony, Clio, all right? And for God's sake, LMS is what THX used. It's anybody who's like, oh, well, your measurements aren't any good because there's a new measurement thing out. Anybody who says that's an idiot.
Yeah.
That's like telling, Jimmy Page, you need a better guitar, right? Don't use that Dan Electro thing. I mean, and I think Jimmy Page's whole point of using the Dan Electro was to show no. It's in my fingers, people. Yeah. This is not the instrument. And that's the whole thing. And that's one advantage that you have if you use something like a Clio or whatever, or a Room EQ Wizard, which can do more or less the same things. If you do speaker measurements with that, then you learn things. You understand things about speakers. I mean, you're there for the whole process, and as opposed to walking away for an hour, right? You're seeing every one of those curves pop up, and you learn a lot, especially if you don't have an automatic turntable, which I really should have bought one like 20 years ago. But But that's also like that's like 200,000 calories I wouldn't have burned.
So let's get back on track here. There's something I wanted to ask you about because, it's I'm sorry, I don't talk about speaker measurement when you're in the room because why bother? I mean, that would be like you trying to explain the Rubik's Cube to somebody and just, no, you'd pass it off to me. So one of the things that they criticize him for, and I'd like to hear you talk about, is the fact that like he only measures like above 200 hertz. It's
good point.
Look, there are a lot of valid criticisms of Danny in this thread, I think. And there are also just a lot of ad hominem attacks, right? And we have to sort those out because some of what they're criticizing for is valid and some of it is not. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the whole 200 hertz and above thing.
Okay, I have many thoughts. First of all, this is from a guy named Rick Sikora, who I don't know, but he's very vocal. He's not vocal, whatever the print equivalent of vocal
Loquacious?
is.
No, that doesn't work either.
On this forum, show me anyone else that is claiming to be a state-of-the-art speaker designer and does not measure below 200 hertz. Okay, Danny knows how to measure below 200 hertz. As do I. It's one of the first things you learn to measure when you measure speakers manually, as he and I do, right? And there are different methods to do that. John Atkinson has spoken a great deal about this. I have too. Lots of people have. But the thing is, when you're dealing with a speaker crossover, which is mostly what Danny focuses on, right? Below 200 hertz doesn't matter. You're looking, the key area of interest with a speaker like this is going to be above 1,000 hertz. And you don't need to run a full 200 hertz measurement. And I'm sure Danny has a below 200 hertz measurement for the speaker, but he doesn't need to show that. That's not what he's dealing with. And by the way, when you measure with something like a Clio, which I would think this guy posting on here would know this, but maybe he doesn't. Any kind of quasi-anechoic measurement, which is the vast majority of measurements that you have out there, you're going to be measuring separately the bass, right? Below 200 hertz or somewhere in there, right? You're going to be close miking the woofer, close miking the port, whatever. Maybe you'll do a ground plane measurement, whatever. But you don't need to run a full bandwidth sweep on the speaker if you're messing with the crossover. It's pointless. And I'm sure Danny has that measurement, but he doesn't show that because that's not what you have with a Clio. You have to, with a Clio or any of these other quasi-anechoic things, you have to join the two measurements. And if this guy, Rick Sikora, actually understands speaker measurement, he'd know that. Yeah. Right? Yeah. That's why, Danny doesn't go in and laboriously, splice the two curves together for every measurement he's showing when he's working on the crossover. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. That is the way speaker measurements work. I really wish... Like I've shown people how to measure speakers, and every time they do it, they're just like blown away. They're just like, wow, this is really complicated. And until you've actually done quasi-anechoic measurements yourself or had someone walk you through it, you do not understand how it's done, and you really should just shut up. Danny knows what he's doing.
Well, with regard to speakers and crossovers, for sure,
Well, maybe AC chords, he's a little out there, but with speakers, he knows. And I'll also add that, the problems of a speaker below 200 hertz are a lot harder to fix than the problems above that. And they're probably not for Danny to fix a problem below 200 hertz, that's going to be speaker surgery. That's going to be, you're probably not going to do that in your crossover. You're going to do it with the acoustics of the cabinet. I mean, you could do it with a crossover, but it's going to be big parts and a lot of them. And, and to go in there and do surgery on the cabinet or put a different woofer in or change the port or something like that, that's a big, big, big deal. And it's probably going to be beyond what a company like GR Research does. I mean, he does stuff the cabinet, and he does point out that this thing is not braced and it's got a lot of problems. He points out what the problems are in the bass, but you don't need to show that measurement.
Yeah, we should probably say for context, for anybody who's not familiar with Danny, like these videos that he does a lot of times, he will take a speaker, because one of the things that he does in addition to designing and building speakers is sells kits to fix speaker design. And people will send in a speaker and he will do the measurements that he needs to do to make recommendations to fix or upgrade the crossover and things like that, and the tweeter, whatever, right? And so that's the context that you should understand this discussion in. He is basically doing what measurements he needs to do to properly design a kit to fix problems with this speaker model. So yeah, it's not like he's out here selling his speaker measurements as the be all and end all, and it's not really a review that he's doing. It is a means to an end.
Right.
So, whereas, I think the audio science review crowd, a lot of times, I just recorded the second part of an oral history with Dr. Floyd Toole. And at one point, he really drilled down to the point that the listening was always the most important thing. All of the measurements that he did were in service of figuring out what the problems were when those problems were reported in listening. The listening tests were the gold standard for him. And I feel like a lot of times some of the audio science review crowd, which I call audio data review, they get hung up on the collection of data and the measurements and what they mean. And they forget, like if you look at their receiver reviews or amplifier reviews or anything, their entire ranking is based on SINAD, signal to noise and distortion. That is the only metric they care about. If it's higher SINAD, it is a better amp. If it's lower SINAD, it's a worse amp, and they're very reductive in that regard. So, although, as we said, Danny Ritchie is not above criticism, and we've got a lot of criticism for him. No, I don't think this is not the right messenger. They're looking for stuff to pick on him for.
I don't mean to get so incensed about this, but I hate it when people criticize measurements without taking the trouble to understand why the person did the measurement that way.
There's one thing that I wish Danny and the ASR crowd alike would understand, and it's something that you and I have said many, many times before on the podcast. The currency of science is uncertainty.
Yes.
And if you never, ever doubt your conclusions, you are not doing science. I'm sorry.
No. No.
Anyway, buddy, you want to go get a drink of water and come back and talk about cassette tapes?
Make it happen.
All right. We'll be right back. Audio
Unleashed.
And this time around, we're talking about an article that you co-authored, Brent Butterworth. As I said in the introduction, this is a piece for Wirecutter, co-authored with you and Ariana Vasquez.
That's right.
And so the headline is New Portable Cassette Players Transport You Back to the 80s. But do you really want to go there? So give me the 30,000 foot pitch for this. Like what I knew, you had written a few years ago about cassette for Wirecutter, or was that just for the Times? No, that was for Wirecutter.
For Wirecutter.
Don't call it a comeback. Cassettes have sounded lousy for years and still do.
Can I just say something?
Sure.
All right. Let me just say right now, for everyone listening to this, whoever wrote the article probably didn't write the headline. Okay. Just so you know, these headlines are probably more negative than I would make them. But
that's a good point.
And that's across publications. So anyway, and the bigger the publication, the less likely it is that the writer wrote the headline. So Anyway, I wanted to do this because this company called We Are Rewind came out with their own cassette player. About a year and a half ago, I think. And it's like $150. It's kind of cool. It's like an aluminum case. It's got a Bluetooth transmitter in it, so you can transmit to Bluetooth headphones or speakers. It's got rechargeable batteries. It's a thorough update. And then FiO, is it FiO, whatever?
FiO.
I'm the FiO. FiO came out with, you know what? Spell it FAIO if you want to call it FiO. So FiO came out with their own player for $99. And of course, there's a whole bunch of them. You may not realize there's a bunch of them on Amazon for 30, 40, 50 bucks. I mean, I think I got one on there for 20 bucks a couple years ago. And so I thought, you know what? They're coming out with these things. Somebody's buying them. And we should actually evaluate these things. And so it took a while to talk my editors into it, but we finally did it. And so Ariana, so it's like, what do I think about cassette? Well, who cares? I'm almost dead. And I grew up with them. You know, I grew up in an era where cassette was unavoidable, especially for musicians. If you wanted to produce music, you had to do it on a cassette. And I had cassette multi-tracks. I don't know how many different cassette machines. And I had a Walkman, a couple different cassette Walkman that I commuted with in New York City and all that kind of stuff, right? So what is my opinion worth? It's like, well, we know what I think about cassettes. So I wanted to get someone who's younger. So Ariana, I don't know how old she is, but she's a lot younger than me. And, you know, she's like one of the sort of, I guess, kind of junior level writers at Wirecutter. I can't remember her title, but she is really into audio too. And so she kind of had told me she wanted to get into audio writing. And so anyway, I said, well, why don't you try these things out and actually commute in New York where she lives and see what it's like to commute with them. And for someone who's new to it, right? Someone who's used to streaming off of their phone. And so but then also at the same time, I decided I want to run technical tests on these things. And I wasn't sure. I mean, I'd done it before and I read a lot about it. I read about how like Julian Hirsch used to do it in stereo review and things, but still wasn't sure. So I went up to Innovative Audio, this great vintage audio store up in Surrey, British Columbia, which is a suburb of Vancouver. And a guy named Paul Demara met me there. He's Paul I've known for, I don't know, 10, 12 years. Paul's written for different audio publications. He's super ultra hardcore vintage audiophile. I think he owns a few dozen portable cassette players.
Wow.
I think he owns every mini disc player or recorder Sony ever made. His house it's unbelievable. So anyway, so he has actually dug into this stuff. And so he kind of got me onto this program called Knock 100, which is put out by, I guess, Nakamichi, which is kind of really designed. I think it costs very little to download it. It's kind of actually designed for testing cassette decks. And so we use that. And Edwin Shee, who's like the chief technician at Innovative Audio, kind of wandered over to look at what we were doing. And but it was interesting. And, you know, Ariana found that she kind of thought it was cool, like a lot, like from a sonic standpoint, she actually liked the worst of the players the best. And she recognized that it sucked, but she thought she likened it to it being like shooting with a Instamatic camera.
Oh yeah.
And so it was kind of like an aesthetic thing for her rather than a quality quest. But she hated lugging all that stuff with her on the subway, which I can understand. Which, like, I used to do that with the cable, you know, the wired headphones and everything. And I used to do that and thought nothing of it. And then I got a portable CD player, and I used that and carried all this physical media with me and never thought a thing of it. And now I don't. And now it's like I wouldn't even think about carrying all that junk with me. If people want to do this, that's fine. But it didn't make me want to go back to cassette. And I will say, for all I know, people are going to say, "Oh, but the Nakamichi Dragon." This is like everything I've ever written about cassettes is like, "Oh, but the Nakamichi Dragon." And which is a very, you know, storied cassette deck. And my friend Gordon Soak up at Innovative Audio is kind of like, you know, that's not even the best deck they ever made. And it's got this problem and that problem, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I think this Pioneer's better. And so it's like, but you know, that's the one that people think is great because it's called Dragon, I guess. And
I mean, you know, most things called Dragon are really freaking cool. So,
true.
You know, yeah.
True.
I wanted to ask you real quick about a technical aspect of all of this, because one of the things that I was looking for in the story but did not find, and there may be a good reason for that, or it may just be irrelevant, but, I was a cassette baby. Cassettes are my childhood. And so, one of the biggest, I think the first real sort of quote unquote journey that I went on to really sort of find ways to improve my audio listening experience when I was young was testing out different ways of doing noise reduction and stuff like that. But I don't see anything in here about the noise reduction capabilities of any of these decks.
They don't
have Oh, okay. Does Dolby even license that anymore?
I'm sure they would. They still have all the books on it and stuff, and they still have the licensing manuals. They could, I guess they do. Maybe it's, I'm sure that the patents have expired by now. If you want to say you have B-type noise reduction, Dolby probably sue you. So,
right.
And, cassette, weirdly, people are making these portables, but no one's making a home cassette deck. The only designs that are out there's like a cheap one from Pile. And then there's, you might still be able to get like a Tascam, new old stock, so to speak, that was made a long time ago. But no one has really done that. And I should point out, all three of these players, even though they were different brands and wildly different prices, all of them use the same transport. And Edwin from Innovative, he's like, there's probably a warehouse in China where there's literally 1 million of these transports just sitting there waiting to be used.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Anyway, but you wanted to mention though that the idea of releasing stuff on cassette for musicians, which
there was a video that I'd sent you a few weeks ago. Maybe when you were mentioning this article or something like that. There's a guitarist that I like named Mary Spender, and she is putting out an album now. She'd originally done the demos during COVID, and now she's properly producing it and everything like that. And she did a YouTube video called Cassette Tapes, The Future of Music. One of the things that she talks about in the course of the video is just the nostalgia for, making mixtapes. And Henry Rollins has a clip about that. And she gets into the sort of her love of analog and making mixtapes and receiving mixtapes and everything like that. But one of the interesting things for me is then she went into the economics of it as a musician and sort of talked about the fact that, replicating cassette tapes can be anywhere from, you've got a dual deck and you just sort of do it yourself, or you pay somebody else to do it and they're charging like $3 per cassette that you then turn around and sell for $10. But she said, ultimately, for her as a musician, she's making a lot more money off selling cassettes than she is off of Spotify or what have you. Yeah. She doesn't really get into the economics of CD and stuff like that. But I thought from a musician's point of view, it was just really interesting to hear her talk about how much more money she made off of selling cassettes than anything in the digital domain. That was a really interesting take. And I wonder if some of this revival is just... I'll have to be honest with you. I don't have to wonder too much because I met a cassette fan in the wild not too long ago over at Village Green Records here in Montgomery. There was a guy in there that was buying a copy of Polygon Dwanaland on cassette. That's the King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard album. And I was sort of curious about why. And he was like, well, yeah, I got the LP at home, but I want to listen to it on the go. And I was just finding that a lot of kids, I wouldn't say a lot of kids, but a lot of kids who frequent record stores these days are just sort of completely eschewing connected technology. They don't trust it. They don't have iPhones. They've got flip phones. They won't drive cars that have a built-in head unit. They just don't trust anything that's connected.
Wow.
And so for them, it's like, they prefer to listen to music on vinyl, but then what do you do when you're on the go? Well, you either make a cassette or, hey, the artist released a cassette officially. Heck yeah, I'll buy it for $10 just to support them. Yeah. So I thought that was an interesting take too. But speaking of take two, you're a musician. Are you going to release your next album on cassette?
No, because, here's the thing. It's going to cost a lot more. CDs are almost free. It costs less than $1 a CD to have them replicated with the covers.
Yeah.
Okay. With cassette, and the covers are really easy to design. With cassettes, it's going to cost more. because CDs are stamped. Cassettes actually have to be physically run off on duplicating machines. So it's a lot more difficult. And, I think a lot of the mechanisms to do that are long gone. Rarer than vinyl making gear at this point, I would think. And, then you have some kind of physical thing. I mean, some of the latest cassettes we bought, I think the Ed Sheeran one I bought came in a cardboard sleeve to protect it without a plastic case, which I thought that's crappy. And
like old cassette singles or something, like that kind of packaging.
Yeah, and you print on the sleeve rather than have an insert in there, and you could do that, but that's not much of a collector's item to me. And I think with any physical media, there's a collector element to it at this point. So. Yeah, I kind of don't like the idea of releasing on cassette. The idea is you could do your own, like I used to do 30 years ago as a musician. You make your own cassette inserts, you print them out. Once like Macs came out, the first ones, you could actually print black and white on those, and then you could design it so you could color it in with like felt markers, right? And that's the way I did my first releases. Is I had the cards printed somewhere, or maybe I printed them myself and cut them out physically with scissors. I can't remember, but I had them. There was a Mac in my office that no one was using because no one wanted to touch it because it was too scary. And they literally bought it and no one used it. I'm kind of like, I'll use that. And I made all my own inserts and I ran off my own copies. And I bought blank TDK tapes or something, right? And gave them out to people. And so, but now, no, I'm not going to do that. I mean, unless if I find a cassette duplicating thing where I can run off 20 for relatively cheap, I'll do it. But no, I'm not going to make any money on it. So
one more question for you on a technical level, if I might.
Yeah, sure.
You talked about measuring all of these things, and you talked about that, they're all built on the same mechanism. What were the most surprising things about the differences in the way they measured to you?
Well, they measured very different. I was surprised by that. Even though the transport's the same, the electronics apparently were very different. And the cheapie, the really cheap Amazon one we got, I mean, it rolled off a lot below about 100. And then they all rolled off above 10K. But this one rolled off above like 8K. And then when you tried to record with it, because it would record, oh boy, I think the roll off was more like 6K. None of them. The We Are Rewind one also recorded, and the recording was just kind of like, and that was part of my, if you could buy a home deck and do your recordings on a home deck, then play it on these, it'd be kind of okay. Like Paul and I did that up at Innovative. There was like a state of the art, the top of the line Harman machine that Edwin, their tech, had tweaked to the nth degree, and so we used that to make our test tapes. So we figured that would be more or less as good as an actual, official release from a record company, right? And so and we measured from that, and it measured fine. It didn't. I mean, the high frequency roll off was mild at most. It was kind of flat. But once you played it through these portables, it just no. So fidelity is just not there with these things. So let's talk about Bluetooth. I want to talk about Bluetooth.
Good deal. Let's do it. Let's go get a drink of water and come back and talk about why Bluetooth is dead.
Dead. And we're back. This is Audio
Unleashed.
And we are going to talk about the death of Bluetooth. Or so it has been proclaimed by Cheap Audio Man.
Yeah.
And I will say, he might have a valid point here. He might.
Okay. Well, let's concede though, as you were saying, look with publications, the bigger the publication, the less likely it is that the author wrote the headline. With your YouTube channels, the author makes the headline, and it is almost always clickbait. So, right. Like Randy is trying to get you to watch this video. I don't think a lot of people would have. Well, I think people would have been less likely to click on it if the title had been, Ehrlich S10 Plus review. Whereas you can throw out something like Bluetooth is dead and you should be happy about it. And people are going to be like, yeah, all right, I'll click on that. So anyway, what's his premise?
So his premise, there's a whole bunch of new cheap Wi-Fi streamers. These have been out for about 2 years now, I think. Weem is the probably leading purveyor of these. I think you can get a Weem Mini for $89. I bought one. It's good. And so, you're streaming Wi-Fi, through your router and everything, instead of going through Bluetooth. And Bluetooth is always, except in the latest, there is lossless Bluetooth now, but it's pretty rare and it's only going to work under ideal conditions. With Wi-Fi, it can, to my knowledge, all the systems out there are lossless, and they can stream, high quality audio either from files that are stored on a hard drive somewhere on your network, or, from the high quality, CD resolution or better files from places like Apple Music, right? Or Tidal or whoever, Qobuz. And, so you sacrifice nothing in quality if you're streaming through one of these things, at least theoretically. And, so his point is, hey, look, these things are really cheap. And there's like the WIM amp, which we've talked about, which is $250. It's got a pretty competent little Class D amp in there. It's got, analog inputs. It's got, Wi-Fi. It's got Bluetooth and all that stuff. So, and, you just hook up a couple speakers and you've got a really good system. Even Stereophile reviewed this thing, which is shocking. But his point is like, hey, look, this stuff is so cheap. Why do you need Bluetooth anymore? Now, granted, he reviews home audio gear, to my knowledge. I don't think he really reviews portable stuff. So from his point of view, for the home, it's like, if you've got even a remotely halfway decent audio system, there's not really a good reason to use Bluetooth when you can use these little streamers that are so cheap. And as he points out, he does a really good job at kind of breaking these things down. And he talks about the different outputs that are on these. And, these all have a built-in digital to analog converter. So they have an analog output. And, the quality of that could be somewhat compromised. And so he suggests using the digital output. I think almost all of them have like a Toslink output at least. And, he suggests using that. And I've actually found that to be the case. I tested... I can't remember. I've tested a couple of these things, like some of the really cheap Bluetooth receivers that are out there that have Toslink output. A lot of times you do hear an improvement if you have a decent audio system, Parasound preamp in my case, and you use the Toslink input from these cheap little devices, it's probably going to sound better.
I found when I was doing the Wirecutter guide, the last version of the Wirecutter guide to Bluetooth receivers, the Toslink almost always sounded better until you got up to about the $99 mark. And then, especially with like the iFi stuff, it's like, no, these things have got really good DAC, really good DACs built into them. And below that, I don't think it was... it was probably something to do with either the volume control or the reconstruction filter or something like that. But the using the analog outputs, it was duller, a lot of high end roll off and things like that. But once you got up to like the iFi stuff, you couldn't tell the difference between the optical output and the analog output. So,
okay, now I want to talk about why Randy, Cheap Audio Man, is wrong.
Can we talk about the fact that this dang thing uses 2 different apps and has a bunch of stupid settings that don't really do anything? And Like, come on, man. Like, why do you need all the apps? That's the thing that infuriates me the most about these things. Well, now this does use sort of the same backbone as like the Weem stuff.
Right.
And it's kind of like what Playfi tried to do, where they wanted to create a universal app and every different manufacturer could skin it differently. All of these are sort of built on that. But
a lot of them are.
And it's like a one-size-fits-all app that doesn't fit the size of this device. Yeah. And it's got a weird high-pass filter for no reason that doesn't do anything. It's kind of a weird... I'm like, man, Bluetooth just freaking works. That's the thing I'll say about it. It just freaking works.
That's why I prefer Bluetooth, because then I can use the native app on the streaming service. And you can actually do that a lot. With some of these apps, you can stream straight out of it. Via Wi-Fi. I mean, Spotify Connect works like that, right? Although with Spotify, you're already talking about lossy audio anyway. But
for now.
Yeah, for now. Oh God, don't get me into that. But with Bluetooth, and let's face it, Bluetooth streamed at any kind of reasonable data rate above 192 kilobits per second or something is really good. And you're probably not going to notice a big difference. You're not going to notice a big difference. You may imagine that you do, but you won't. There are people who claim that, Bluetooth is terrible. It just sounds awful. But those people are just wrong. And, tons of blind tests have been done with this stuff. And people can hear a difference, but it's not a huge difference. And the convenience of using the native app, to me, is just gigantic. And that's one of the reasons I've never really gotten on board with Sonos, because I just don't like having to go through their app, even though, again, you don't always have to go through their app. Some of these things let you stream directly out of the native app.
Did I already tell the story that I heard about Sonos from a dealer?
No. Oh, yeah, you did. Yeah, you already told that. Yeah.
Okay.
So that most people don't stream through Sonos's app. So I just, that's one thing, is I don't like the apps that come with these things in general, and I don't like fooling with them. And like if I granted, I don't listen to regular audio systems all that much, because so much of my life is testing wireless speakers and sound bars. But, there's a lot of these sound bars that have built-in Wi-Fi streaming nowadays. Certainly the top of the line or the higher end models from, Polk and Samsung and LG and Sony and people like that all have Wi-Fi streaming built in. And I just never use it, because, the Bluetooth's fine. And once you get into these sound bars, they're going to be doing a significant amount of digital signal processing no matter what.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to be changing the sound, hopefully in a good way. And with a lot of these, it is good, but you're changing it to suit the physics of the soundbar. And so what's the point of using Wi-Fi with that? Are you really going to hear a difference? No. But
so much of our hobby is about convincing people that there are these tiny little insignificant differences matter.
That's true. But with things like, especially all these active speakers now and sound bars, they just really don't. And it bothers me when people get all fussy about, having, some lossy audio codec in the chain, when your device is already substantially changing the sound in ways that are clearly audible.
Yeah.
And yet you're not worried about that, especially like headphones, right? It's like people are worried about the different codecs that are used in them. It's like, but the headphone's already radically changing the sound no matter what headphone it is. And you're not worried about that, but you're worried about this codec, which you probably can't hear in a blind test. So I get a little disappointed with that. It's like, this is one lesson here on Audio
Unleashed
that I would really like to stress, is that it's important. Differences are important, but it's always vital to put those differences in perspective.
Yes, absolutely. I'm reviewing the Peachtree Audio's new Carina 300 integrated amp right now, and the Bluetooth sounds great. Oh, by the way, the Bluetooth antenna on this thing, have you seen those like big like telescoping batons that people are selling for self-defense now?
No.
Like the Bluetooth antenna for this thing looks like one of those. I mean, it looks like you could beat somebody to death with it. And the range is just incredible. Wow. It's all the way into my backyard. But like, what codec is it using? I don't know. And I'm listening and I'm going, well, I'm using an iPhone. I'm not hearing the codec here. Maybe am I getting AAC? And so I emailed or messaged somebody from Peachtree. I'm like, do you know what codecs this thing is using? And they're like, we'll ask and get back to you. I don't know. They don't know. And look, these guys are super passionate about audio. And they're like, we'll try to find that information for you. But you were like, care about that? And I'm like, I'm doing a review. I just want to know. But, it sounded great. So what are you going to do?
What are you going to do? Well, look, if you want to get one of these Wi-Fi streamers, look, they're really cool. They're really cheap. And if you do care about quality and you are using Apple Music or something like that, then sure, get one of these things. Or if you still have files, stored on a hard drive somewhere that you want to stream, that's fine too. Other than that, I'll just stick with Bluetooth. I mean, I have the Weem streamer. I plug it in once in a while. Yeah. But granted, for Cheap Audio Man, I think given his audience and the kind of gear he reviews, it's kind of an obvious and super ultra. That's his point. It's an obvious and super ultra cheap improvement you can get in your system if sound quality really matters.
Yeah.
So I'm completely down with his viewpoint on that. Totally.
There you go. All right, buddy. Anything else to say about this one?
Bluetooth should live forever.
I think it will. Until something comes on and replaces it. Or, capitalists destroy society as we know it. It doesn't matter. So,
well, we'll be back to physical media pretty soon, and not digital physical. Analog physical media is going to completely take over, and not for reasons that Michael Fremer says.
We need to find some audio equivalent of that famous Einstein quote. I know not what weapons the next war will be fought, but the one after that will be fought with sticks and stones.
Yeah,
it's like we've got to translate that into audio somehow.
All right.
All right, buddy, you want to do some credits?
Yeah, so this is a Butterburger production.
Oh man, you did so good. Good job. I don't think we're going to have any new music this week, so we'll recycle some stuff. Yeah. It's your turn to edit.
Oh, it is. I'll edit this. Blame it on me.
Yeah. Anything else?
Is there anybody we want to thank? If Carnell's the one who told us about the Audio Science Review, Danny Ritchie stuff, then thank you for...
And if Carnell's not the one who told us about that, then just thanks for being Carnell.
Indeed. Indeed.
All right, buddy. Well, everybody, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, but patrons, stick around. We got one more for you.
See you guys.
Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you liked what you heard and wish there'd been a little bit more of it, we got some good news for you.
Indeed, we do. If you check out patreon.com/Audio Unleashed, all one word, you can get new episodes a little earlier than everybody else.
And sometimes it's like a day or two early. Sometimes it's nearly a week. We never really know until we start editing.
But the big plus is that you get extended cuts of every episode. And usually that's going to mean a whole extra segment that's about maybe a geekier topic or something that's a little more personal to us or something that's just going to really appeal to the hardcore Audio Unleashed listener.
Yeah, what it boils down to is if you're somebody who would support Audio Unleashed on Patreon, we're going to make sure the bonuses to every episode are really aimed straight at your interests.
Yeah, and so if you want to hear these segments, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $3 a month, which is less than I spend every single day on my cup of coffee when I go to Starbucks to write my boring articles.
Yeah. One more time with that URL, that's patreon.com/Audio Unleashed.
Or Audio
Unleashed. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.